This is Abe Friedtanzer from cinemadailyus.com, and I'm so thrilled to be speaking with Dror Moreh about the corridors of power. How are you, Dror?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Good, good. I'm not sure if you remember, but we spoke about a year and a half
Of course,
ago.
about human factor. Yeah,
Yes, and then 10 years ago now, or 9 years ago, about the gatekeepers, and that was way back in person. So it's nice to follow you as you take on the world and its responsibilities in peace and war in film.
yeah. Well, it's been a task, daunting task.
Well, it's interesting to see the progression because you started with the gatekeepers where you're looking at within Israel, moving to the human factor as the U.S. role in Middle Eastern peace, and now focused a lot more on the U.S. and its global role. Can you explain your interest in that sort of progression to me?
Each one of the movies was done or was initiated by passion or by something a question that I had, and I wanted to answer that question. By the way, the human factor started, or the idea to do the human factor started basically at the middle of doing the corridors of power. So it's not synchronized. It's not kind of one after the other. Corridors of Power basically started with me when I saw the chemical attack in Syria and the horrible death from chemical weapon of almost 1,500 people, amongst them almost 400 kids who didn't do anything. And it was after Obama proclaimed his red line and said that if Syria will use the chemical weapon, it will be a red line and America will act, which basically kind of he drew a line in the sand and said that's, and then he didn't act, and then America didn't follow on the red line. And I asked myself, while I was just horrified from the pictures, I asked myself, what is the difference between Libya, where America intervened, leading a coalition, in order to stop a dictator from basically promising to kill his people in Benghazi, and why didn't they intervene in Syria? So that's kind of was the motivator to ask the question. There were other kind of things, but this basically was why I went out to this journey.
I mean, it's staggering just the amount of video footage that you have of things happening in these places, and that we really should be acting. And for me, I'm somebody who grew up in the 90s, and so these are things I remember hearing about but not knowing as much about. But it's horrifying how much documentation there is that all this stuff happened, and yet we didn't do anything.
Exactly. And for me, the issue is much more about and it's heartbreaking because when you see the world as it is today, there is influence. What I want to say is that there is influence on the decision not to act. Whatever good reason you have not to act, and some of the reason not to act were good reason at the time, but it has impact on our life, on each and every one's life. The decision of Obama not to act in Syria resulted in this mass displacement of people. Almost 600,000 people were killed in Syria. Millions were refugees. Those millions of refugees, some of them went into Europe, completely changed the atmosphere in the continent in Europe. America probably, Trump wouldn't have been voted to office if there was so we have to understand that those issues that are happening, we say, well, it's, like Neville Chamberlain said, why should we care for people with unpronounceable names in an unpronounceable place? We have to care now. When someone has a virus in Wuhan, it affects us all over the world. So those things that are happening are affecting us. When Vladimir Putin decides to invade Ukraine, it affects our life as well. And we have to care.
And I think starting with that phrase "never again" and looking at the Holocaust and sort of that sentiment that's emerged from it, I think that it's very important because I think people like to tell themselves maybe that things aren't as bad as something else, and it can't be as bad as everybody says or something, or we would be doing something. And so I think that's a very potent comparison.
Yeah, never again is a nice phrase, but as I see in my movie, and I particularly chose to start the movie at the 90s because it's the place where America stood as the only global superpower. The Cold War was ended. America stood as the victorious nation, the shining city on the hill. It could do whatever it wanted by the mere fact that it stayed the only global superpower. And it happened over and over again and again, as we show in the movie. And for me, what was interesting mostly is to speak to those people. Why did it happen? Why did America didn't act or acted in some places?
Well, you do have some pretty damning quotes like human rights abuses and chemical weapons aside, our interests align. It's pretty insane what people actually write and think that is somehow okay and that will sort of live on in history as a reason to do or not to do something.
Yeah, look, the amount of research that went into this project is staggering. I think that I have probably the most comprehensive knowledge about those kind of atrocities, those kind of incidents that I describe in the movie than anybody else. And going through those documents, I was shocked time after time after time, shocked to see, as you said, those, I mean, this is one quote: chemical weapon use aside, our interest lies with Iran. I mean, you cannot really, human rights and chemical weapon use aside, our interest lies with parallel to those of Iraq. I mean, just imagine those words. What does it mean? That mean people can be killed with chemical weapon, but our interests are there with Iraq. We should continue to support it.
Yeah. Well, once again, I am very impressed with your ability to get so many people to talk to you, because the same thing with, the gatekeepers and the human factor, there are some people who are involved in all this and they're willing to talk and say what definitely is not the, party line of what they should be saying. Was it a struggle to get to all these different powerful people?
Look, I mean, Dennis Ross, who was the key figure in my human factor, basically the corridor started in the Aspen Ideas Festival, where there was a screening of the gatekeepers. And in that screening, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was there. There were Queen Rania was there. There was National Security Advisor. They were in the crowd. And at the end of that Q&A that he conducted with me after the screening, he asked me, okay, you were nominated now for the Academy Award. What is your next project? And I said, I would like to line up 5 secretaries of state and speak to them. And everybody laughed. And I said, no, I'm really, really serious. I want to understand, why did you intervene in Libya and not in Syria? The basic question that I told you about. And then Dennis became serious and he said, well, it's a good question. I might be able to help you on that. And then in front of everybody, I asked you, can we shake on that? Can we shake hands on that? We shook hands. And he basically kind of started to open Washington and said, created the first connection with the people. And then, what I found is that those people, those Secretary of State, I interviewed almost all living secretaries of state, from Kissinger to Schultz to Baker to Condi Rice to Colin Powell, Madeleine Albright, Hillary Clinton, and the current one, Antony Blinken. They wanted to speak. I felt that they had something that lays heavily on their conscience. They wanted to share that. They wanted to unburden themselves. And I understand that because, basically, we look for America to change the world, to intervene. And I believe that the people in those corridors of power are good people, each and every one of them. They are not bad people. They are not the perpetrators. The perpetrators are those on the ground who are committing those atrocities. And they have to face almost, I mean, you cannot believe the kind of potency of those decisions, how much burden it puts on you, on each one of them. And this is what I felt. I felt that the weight of those decisions lays heavily on them, and they wanted to unburden themselves. Maybe, and me, I do very long interviews. My interviews normally last 3, 4, 5 hours. And at one point they open, they open up, they speak like human beings. And that's, for me, it's all about the human factor. We are all human beings, even those people there in those decision-making room. They have to go home. They have to wake up in the morning, look themselves in the mirror, and ask themselves those tough questions. Did I do good or did I do wrong?
I also think it's easier for people to speak once they're no longer in a position of service. I think we've seen that a lot with American politicians taking a stand against their party, let's say, and then not running for re-election because, it's just, it doesn't work as much after that. So while you did talk to, as you said, some people still in service, do you think that's part of it, that it's easier for people to look back and feel freer to talk?
I think absolutely. I did one interview with 2015 with John Steinberg, who was a very close aide to President Obama while Obama was in office. And the interview was horrible. He was not willing to speak. So at that point, after that interview, I said, I'm stopping the interviews now. I will wait until Obama will leave office, 2017, and then I will continue the project. And that's caused the 2-year delay in stopping because I felt that they cannot really speak while he's still in office. And when he was out of office, then they spoke. And what was interesting in the conversation with them is that they didn't really build the narrative yet for themselves of what happened in those years. And I felt that, let's say, the Clinton people had much more time to build themselves narratives about what happened during Rwanda, Bosnia, Kosovo. They had, you have to live with yourself. We are all human. We have to tell ourselves stories. Why didn't we act in Bosnia? Why didn't we act in Rwanda? And we have to believe in those stories. And the people of the Obama people, the narrative was not really still built thoroughly. And so that's why I felt it was more an open and really heart-searching discussion with them.
I was also surprised to see certain people I was pretty sure are no longer alive, and then I double-checked, and that is the case. You got some sort of last interviews with Madeleine Albright and George Shultz, right?
Schultz, Colin Powell also is not with us.
Right.
Scowcroft is not with us. He's in the other, and yeah, there are quite a few people. Sandy Berger is not with us. Yeah, last interviews with many of those decision makers.
Well, so what has the response been like from audiences and, more importantly, from politicians and governments? Have any of them told you they've seen the film?
No, up until now. Look, the film was first shown in Telluride Film Festival, and then it was shown at AFI and the New York Doc Film Festival, and he's now just starting his way in the cinemas in America. So the response from audience was shock, I would say. If there is one word that I can describe that people felt when they were going out from the movie, total shock, and saying this is one of the most important things they have watched. And this is basically what I saw. Politicians, I don't know if any of the politicians that are in the movie, we kind of invited them. There is a screening in Washington. I think it opens this week in Washington. I hope some of them will come to see it in Washington.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people very often, they do an interview and they see the result and they say, well, that's not what I said. Wasn't meant that way. But I think just like all this, when you have video evidence of people talking and people saying things, it's hard to say after the fact, well, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant, because it's archived. It's there.
Yeah, but look, there is, as we know in movies, in documentaries, the director has a lot of power. I can easily, because I create the context from combining the things that they're saying. But for me, the most important thing is not to take what they say out of context. So each one of them said what he said, and it is in the context of why and how he said it. And also, believe me, there were a lot of criticism between administrations. So, and I interviewed from the Clinton administration to the Bush 43 administration, for the Bush 41 administration, and to the Obama administration. And the flux between the administration, there were a lot of criticism between each other. But I kept it to the people that were on the rooms, the corridors of power at that time. So if someone speaks about Bosnia, it's only the people that were in the room during that time. If someone speaks about Syria, only the people that were inside the room during that time are speaking about it. So it's the Obama people speaking, or it's the Clinton, or it's the Bush.
Were there any interviews you felt you couldn't include, or other interviews that you wish you had gotten that you weren't able to?
There were people that said no for obvious reason. For example, Susan Rice didn't want to be interviewed. I think for obvious reason, because her responsibility to some of the decision or not getting the information during the Rwanda crisis. But almost, let's say, 98% of the people that I wanted to be interviewed came and have been interviewed in the movie.
Wow. And so you were working on this, and then the human factor. What's next? What's the next subject?
Well, I did. I need a rest for sure. After it's been really an exhausting, very exhausting 8-10 years, really. And this project took a lot of energy from me, really, and also led me to a place where I'm asking, what are we here for, each and every one of us? And I'm still struggling with that kind of notion. What are we all here for? And, you know, the question that you started by asking, do we learn the lessons? And, you know, we are now 75, 76 years after the Holocaust, after the end of World War II, where 60 million people perished. And you ask yourself, where is this, why humanity doesn't learn? There's so many things that are happening in the world. As I said, you know, I said at one place, I would have loved to do, you know, Tolkien's, what Peter Jackson did, Lord of the Rings, or things like that. That I would have loved to do things like that, but the world as it is today is very challenging, to put it mildly. My next project is going to be, I did an interview with the former head of the Mossad, legendary head of the Mossad, who died already also. And this will be probably my next project. But I'm beginning to be tired and want to take it a little bit slower in the near future.
Well, there are other, documentary filmmakers doing great work. Are there any other films that you've seen recently that you would recommend highly, that you feel are helping to change the world?
I haven't seen a lot of documentaries. I'm so concentrated in doing this. I've seen Matt Heineman in Retrograde in Telluride Film Festival, and it's also I have my reservation with the movie, but it also shows the impact of a decision by President Biden to disengage from Afghanistan. And you see the ramification of that at the day of disengagement, what happened in Afghanistan. And you think, when you think today about a year after, we are now around a year after that disengagement from Afghanistan. And when you think about the people that were left there, the women situation in Afghanistan, those people who supported the US and probably are paying the price now. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. So, yeah, there is
Sorry.
No, there is consequences
right.
to decision. There are consequences on the ground.
Right. And I think unlike, again, a lot of the events from this film, which I don't remember as clearly, I remember seeing photographs of, the airport and what was happening in Afghanistan a year ago, but I don't remember hearing much after that. And I think that's the problem with our current times, is that we do get all this information, but then it stops at a certain point. And so I think that's a helpful part of documentary filmmaking, is to really go deep with all these things and show that it's not just one isolated event. It's not just a chaotic week. There's so much more to it. And we can't all make perfect decisions, but we can learn from what we've done in the past.
Absolutely. The past is the best teacher for each and every for us, for what we need to do next. And you are absolutely right. And that's also part of my criticism about the fact that, we live such an intense life, and such, every day is like a struggle or a battle, and we forget. I mean, is Ukraine now in the headlines? No, it's somewhere around page 13 in the inner columns, and people there, You know, imagine now 5 million people all over Ukraine. I mean, that's the number that I got now, are sitting at the dark in cold winter, very, very cold winter, don't have running water and all of that. And you know, in Bosnia, I remember when Samantha Power told me that at one point people started to hack trees in order to get warm in the winter. Then they hacked the bookshelves, and then they burned the books themselves because they couldn't keep. So these things are happening as we speak.
Well, I always appreciate the chance to speak with you about your films. For more great conversations like this, please subscribe to the Cinema Daily US YouTube channel. Check out The Corridors of Power in theaters now. And Dror, please get some rest and take it easy for a little bit while this film goes out into the world.
I will. Thank you very much. And until next time, see you
Of
again.
course. Thank you.